So I'm just going to kick off before Michael starts with the with this disclaimer that the meeting is being recorded. By continuing to attend and participate in this meeting, you acknowledge that you understand the meeting is being recorded and consent to being recorded. If you do not consent to being recorded, we request you disconnect from the meeting at this time.
All right, are we ready to go? Okay, well, welcome everyone. Thank you for investing your time today with us this afternoon. We have an amazing panel today. My name is Michael Quesada, and I'm the chair of employability. And we just have a fantastic panel today. We're going to be discussing something so important and so widespread now here in the state of Texas, and something that's really starting to really gather people's ears, and especially in human resources and inclusion and diversity. So this is going to be a really good panel. We're talking about a current trend right now, which is service animals in the workplace. And again, this is it's going to be a great opportunity for those of you that are looking to build a program around service dogs, and really just kind of are curious about how a person with disabilities is connected with a service dog. We have some great presenters today, and so we ask that you please really if you have any questions right now, please annotate those down, or if you'd like to place them in the message, send us a message in the chat box there. You can send us your questions, and we'll go ahead and make sure that at the end of the presentation, we'll make sure that we address those and get to those questions. So please, we want this to be very interactive, as we go through the different areas for service animals. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you off to Miss Melissa Simons. Sorry.
Hello, everyone. I'm so excited. We're excited as Employability to welcome our two speakers. We have Linda Carter Batiste. She is a principal consultant legislative specialist with the Job Accommodation Network, JAN, the leading source of free, expert, and confidential guidance on workplace accommodations and disability-related employment issues. She has been with JAN since 1992. She specializes in providing practical guidance and solutions for ADA compliance. Her areas of interest include service animals as workplace accommodations, addictions, and alternative dispute resolution, such as mediation. Her email address is batiste@jan.wvu.edu. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you.
And we also have Alexandra Walch joining us, and she is the Client Services Program Manager for the South Central region of Canine Companions. She is a certified therapeutic recreation specialist, try to say that fast 3 times, and specializes in managing community-based services for people with disabilities that enhance independence, inclusion, and community integration. Her email address is awalch@canine.org. And welcome, Alexandra. And Alexandra will be kicking off our presentation.
Thank you, Melissa. So as Melissa shared, I'm with Canine Companions. We were founded in 1975, and we are a national nonprofit that places service dogs with children, adults, and veterans who have disabilities. Since 1975, we have placed over 7,000 service dogs. So we have a lot of experience working with people. We have been able to provide ongoing support for clients after they have their dog. So we see a lot of the issues and help people deal with challenges and also all of the amazing positive things that happen once they do have a service dog. And we are partnered here in Texas in our South Central region with Baylor Scott and White Health. And we are actually the first service dog agency to be connected with a major healthcare system. So that's a really great partnership for us and has really allowed us to expand our services and serve a lot of people who live within the state of Texas. Melissa, if you want to go ahead and move slides, thank you. So we thought we would start today by just giving a little bit more information on the different types of working dogs. We find that there is a lot of confusion about the difference between service dogs and therapy animals, emotional support animals. There's a lot of language that people aren't necessarily familiar with unless they know. So we figured we'd start off today by just setting out what this language is that you're probably hearing, and that will help you through the rest of the presentation. We have 4 different types of working animals that you might see here that we'll focus on. I'm going to start on the right with therapy animals. So therapy animals are generally dogs that are going to go into a place like a hospital or a nursing home, and they are going to provide comfort for people who are there. Oftentimes they'll work with a volunteer or a staff member, and they'll have permission from the facility to come in and provide comfort, visit with the people who are there. And there aren't really any legal requirements or benefits to having your dog be a therapy animal. There are certifications that people can go to, but there's nothing legally required. So therapy animals are not assigned to a specific individual, and they're definitely different in service dogs because they're going to work with a whole group of people just to provide comfort. Next, I'll talk about emotional support animals. So I think this is the category that is most frequently confused with service dogs. Emotional support animals do have some rights under law. So the Fair Housing Act does cover emotional support animals, and even apartment complexes and college dormitories where you can't take pet dogs are required by law to allow emotional support animals. These are still very different than service animals. So emotional support animals generally work just to provide comfort, or as the name implies, emotional support for an individual. They're not necessarily trained to do that in a specific way. So oftentimes just the love and comfort that having a companion animal brings can help people. And so in those cases where the dog is just by being itself providing that support, they may be an emotional support animal, but they don't have any rights under the law outside of the Fair Housing Act. And that's a really key difference between service animals. So service animals are specifically trained to help someone with a disability, and they're trained to do specific tasks or skills that are going to mitigate their disability. They are covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act in Titles 2 and 3. So the law does provide a lot of protections out in public, not just in the home, for service dogs. They are trained sometimes at an agency like Canine Companions, or they could be owner trained. They usually have extensive health and temperament testing to make sure that they're the kind of dog that is really well qualified to go out in public spaces. And their access rights are generally most places. So they can go to grocery stores and restaurants, the post office. There are some spaces where it may be limited, but for the most part, they can go anywhere that their handler goes. And it's important to note that that public access that is protected under the ADA follows the handler, not the dog. So if my spouse had a service dog, he could take it to a restaurant, but I could not take it on my own to a restaurant if he was out of town because I'm not the individual who needs to use the dog's tasks. So service dogs definitely do have the most protections under the ADA, and these are the dogs that are going to be going out in public and working with their handlers to provide support that they might not otherwise be able to get from another tool. And then I did want to point out service dogs in training as well. So there are not federal guidelines surrounding service dogs in training, but individual states, of course, can have laws that kind of go above and beyond and provide extra protections for people with disabilities. And the state of Texas does happen to be one of those states when it comes to service dogs in training. So within the state of Texas, you can take a service dog that's in training to all of the same places that you could take a service dog as long as they're with their trainer. So again, that could be a trainer like the professional staff at Canine Companions, or that could be an individual who's self-training their service dog, and they have all of the same public access rights as a service dog would have within the state of Texas. And I just want to make sure that's really clear. Each state has their own laws on dogs in training, so that is specific to Texas. Melissa, if you want to move forward. So when thinking about a service dog, these are the dogs who you might see most frequently out in public because they do have those public access rights. But just because it's a service dog does not mean that they can just act however they want to. And one of the ways that you can usually tell if a dog is a legitimate service dog team is based on the behavior that you're seeing. So we've got some things listed here for you to see. The dog should be really well managed by their handler. They shouldn't be doing crazy, goofy dog things. The biggest compliment for a service dog team is oftentimes, oh my gosh, I didn't even know that your dog was there, like when you get up from a restaurant table, because the dog is doing exactly what they're supposed to do, being behaved and focusing on their handler so that they're ready to work. A couple of things to note: you are legally allowed to ask a couple of questions when people come in and claim that they're bringing in a service dog. So those would include, is this a service dog to help with a disability? And then the second question is, what are the tasks that they're trained to do? But you're not able to ask someone to provide proof of certification or training. You're not able to ask someone what their disability is. So those are your two questions. Is this a service dog for a disability? And what tasks are they trained to do? So we always like to have people have those questions in their back pocket. If you ever are concerned or have questions about if a dog does have rights to be in the place where they are, you can ask those two questions, even if it's obvious that the person probably does have a disability. You're still able to ask those questions. And then again, you can have these expectations for a service dog in public spaces. So even if it is a qualified service dog team, if they're being disruptive, if they're having behaviors that are just not acceptable in public, such as those listed here, you could still ask them to leave. Move forward to the next slide. So we wanted to give just a few ideas of why service dogs might be so important for a person with a disability. They can do a lot of really cool things. And this is just a quick snapshot here, but to give you an idea, they may be able to pick up items like keys or your cell phone that you've dropped on the ground. They could open the door to your office or to the restroom stall and hold it open to make sure that you can get through. They could help you get across the parking lot if you've got a really long walk across the lot and it's difficult for you to push your manual wheelchair that far. They could alert to key sounds, so like a fire alarm going off or your coworker calling your name from down the hall. They could guide someone who has a visual impairment to make sure that they get safely from place to place. And of course, one of the ones that I think people get questioned on frequently is medical alert dogs, because you might not be able to see that someone has a disability. But dogs can be trained to do things like notify their handler that they're going to have a seizure or that they've had a change in their blood sugar, and that can give the handler time to get help or get to a position, take medication, whatever it is that they need to make sure that they're staying safe. So there are lots of different things that service dogs may be able to do. And we like to tell people just to remember that even if all of the tasks that the dog's trained to do aren't necessarily something the handler would use all the time while they're at work, they may need those tasks when they're going to and from work or in the other aspects of their life. So for example, if you are driving to work and you need to stop to get gas, but you drop your credit card and you're not able to pick that credit card up from the ground, you can ask a stranger to pick it up for you. Or if you have your service dog, you can just ask your service dog to do it, and you don't have to run in that risk of having someone you don't know come get your credit card at the gas station. So even though maybe I'm not getting my credit card out at the office and needing my dog to retrieve it frequently, that allows me to get to and from work safely. So those are things to think about most definitely with employees is, these are things that they might use at the office, or there may be things that just help them get to and from work in a way that's most safe for them. You can move forward. I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Linda from Jan.
Thanks, Alexandra. Hi, everyone. I'm going to be focusing on service and emotional support animals in the workplace. And I want to start with mentioning a couple resources that we have on our website. One is our service animal page. It has information about all the topics I'm going to cover today, plus a lot of other stuff. And then we have an article specific to emotional support animals in the workplace and some practical guidance for processing that type of request. As you heard in my introduction, we are a free service. We're federally funded by the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy. So all of the information and resources that we provide on our website are free of charge. So feel free to take a look at those. If you have any trouble accessing them, just let me know. We are a national service. Our focus is providing accommodation ideas on a case-by-case basis, as well as answering questions, providing information on the Americans with Disabilities Act. So we're not a legal resource, so we don't give legal guidance, but as you heard in my introduction, we focus on practical approaches to compliance, being proactive, taking steps to provide accommodations when you can. As a national resource, we field maybe 50,000 calls a year. Some of them are emails, some are chats, but we do take a lot of inquiries across the country. I'm one of the primary people that takes our service and emotional support animal questions, and I can tell you that we get a lot of questions in this area, and there always has been and continues to be a lot of confusion over what the rules are in the workplace. So on the next slide, I want to tell you my opinion about why there's so much confusion. You heard Alexandra give a really good overview of the rules for public access under Title II and Title III of the ADA. You have specific guidelines to follow when the public comes in and uses a service animal. You don't have to allow emotional support animals. You can ask a couple questions, all very, very clear. The problem is that none of that applies to Title I for employment access. Title I does not mention service animals or emotional support animals. It doesn't give any specific guidelines for employers to follow. But a lot of people think that those Title II and Title III public access rules do apply. So it becomes very confusing for both employees who think they have automatic access and for employers who think they can, for example, automatically exclude emotional support animals. So this lack of clarity in Title I, lack of any rules or definitions creates this confusion. On the next slide, I want to mention that the recommended approach to dealing with this is to treat a request for an emotional support animal or a service animal just like you would any other accommodation. Because there aren't any rules, you just follow your usual policies for processing an accommodation request, meaning in some cases you can gather information, in some cases you can explore other options. You don't have to automatically say yes. You can make a decision based on that information that you gather. So follow your general rules when needed. If it's obvious that the person has a disability and needs the service animal, you may not need to get a lot of information. You may just need to look at the situation and make your decision. But treat it just like any other accommodation. Go through the process. Don't automatically say no. You don't have to automatically say yes unless you want to. The type of accommodation that this is a modifying a policy. Most employers have a policy that employees are not allowed to bring animals to work. If your policy is you let people bring animals to work, then of course this is not something that would be an accommodation. You would let people with service and emotional support animals bring their animals to work just like everybody else. But like I said, in most cases, employers do not allow animals into the workplace. So this is a form of modifying a policy as an accommodation. And like Alexandra said, always check your state laws because there could be state laws that address access for service animals in the workplace. The ADA doesn't, but there could be some other laws that might apply. On the next slide. One of the results of there being no definition of either service or emotional support animal under Title I of the ADA is that it doesn't rule out other types of animals besides dogs. We get a lot of questions about alternative types of emotional support animals. Most service animals, in my experience, are dogs. As you heard with their training and everything, they are dogs for the most part. Emotional support animals run the gamut. We've had everything from snakes to guinea pigs to cats, horses, pigs, everything you could imagine. It doesn't mean you have to grant a request just because you process it, but our recommendation is that you always get more information rather than just flat out saying no, no matter what the situation is. We had an employer that was adamant that they wouldn't let a guinea pig into the workplace, but when they met the guinea pig, the pig just sat there in the cage very quietly while the employee was able to get emotional support from the guinea pig. And it ended up being a very successful option for the employee. So a best approach for any kind of request for an accommodation is a case-by-case approach, and that includes emotional support animals and service animals. Now, again, this is not legal advice. Because there's no mention of any of this in the Title I part of the ADA, I can't say for sure whether a court in your area has ruled on this and might say something different. I'm talking about best practices, erring on the side of caution. If you're really adamant that you don't want to allow an emotional support animal in the workplace, then check with your legal counsel and see if there's been any decisions in your area. But again, if you can do it and it works for you and it works for the employee, then our usual approach is try it, and if it works, great. So on the next slide, one of the big questions we get is about medical documentation related to service and emotional support animal accommodation requests. Many of you probably know the rules related to what you're allowed to ask when an employee asks for an accommodation. One thing is you're allowed to get medical documentation to show that the employee really has a disability, unless it's obvious, and to show that the employee needs the accommodation. Right now, we're getting a lot of questions as people return to work during the pandemic. A lot of people have been at home with their pets. A lot of people have taken a lot of comfort from their pets, and we're seeing an uptick in the questions we're getting about emotional support animals coming into the workplace. And employers are wanting to know, do we just have to take their word for it? Can we try to sort this out? The answer is yes. If it's not obvious, you're allowed to get documentation to show that the employee has a disability and needs the accommodation. The tricky part of the documentation is going to be that a lot of times a healthcare provider was not involved in acquiring a service animal and oftentimes doesn't even know that an individual takes support from emotional support from an animal. So the healthcare provider may not be able to document that part of it. The healthcare provider may be able to prove that the employee has a medical condition and has difficulty handling stress, for example, and would benefit from an emotional support animal, but may not be able to speak to anything else about the emotional support or even the service animal. So what do you do in that case? You have the right to verify that this animal is appropriately trained to be in the workplace and not to create a disruption or a direct threat, for example, biting people or peeing on the carpets or barking. So how do you do that? If somebody trained the service animal like Alexandra's group does, they may be able to document that the animal is appropriately trained. In other situations where the individual trained the animal or it's an emotional support animal, what we suggest as a best practice is to have the individual bring the animal into the workplace for a demonstration of its behavior. You can also do a trial period, let the animal come in on a contingent basis that if it's behaved and doesn't disrupt the workplace, then okay, we're going to allow it. Most employers prefer the demonstration method because if it is aggressive, for example, they want to rule that out before it gets near any other people. So you have the right to ask for a demonstration or some other method to help ensure that the animal can be in the workplace safely and without disruption. All right. The other issue I wanted just to mention briefly is some of the concerns that employers raise when they ask us about allowing a service or emotional support animal in the workplace. Probably the number one thing I hear is, well, What about other employees being allergic or having phobias to the dog? The general answer to that is that if you have other employees with disabilities that are affected by having a service animal in the workplace, before you deny the animals access on that basis, you want to see if you could possibly accommodate both parties. We have a document on our website about accommodating employees with allergies to service animals. Some of those same accommodation ideas can work for phobias as well. It basically involves trying to separate the two parties as much as possible, maybe having separate routes of travel, different work schedules, leaving the service animal temporarily in an office if the two have to meet together, more cleaning, things like that. So we have lots of ideas in that area. The best approach, again, would be to explore accommodations that would work for both parties so that you can allow the service animal or emotional support animal. If you can't do anything to prevent the allergies or phobias, that could be a reason to deny a request. But again, you want to do your homework and make sure that there's nothing you can do. A lot of employers are worried about disruptions in the workplace. And again, what I just talked about a demonstration or maybe a trial period is one of the best approaches to dealing with that. If the animal does become disruptive, then you can ask the person to remove it and not bring it back until it can be appropriately behaved in the workplace. And the other issue is liability. We can't really speak to liability and tell anybody what their liability would be if a service animal bit somebody or something happened to the service animal at work. I usually suggest employers check with their workers' comp carrier or their liability carrier for questions like this. As far as the ADA goes, you can't deny a request solely because you might have a liability. You would have to actually show that it would be an undue hardship at the level that the liability would be and that it's very likely to happen. All right, on the next slide, what I want to do for the rest of the time is go through some common scenarios that we hear about related to service and emotional support animals in the workplace. I think this helps illustrate everything that I just said better than me just talking about it, because it is rather confusing. With each scenario, I'm going to give you the general ADA rules and then some best practices for providing accommodations. So on the next slide, the first scenario, we have an applicant who showed up with her service animal for a job interview. The employer refuses to conduct the interview because the applicant did not notify them ahead of time. Is this a good approach? So on the next slide, you'll see that the general ADA rule, as I mentioned, employers do not have to automatically allow service animals in the workplace. Those public access rules just don't apply. And technically, an employer can go through the accommodation process before considering. So the request should have been made ahead of time by the individual, and technically the employer does not have to provide the accommodation unless that process takes place. But I don't think the employer's approach is the best approach. I think a better best practice would be to go ahead with the interview. If you end up hiring this person and the person needs a service animal on the job, you can get into the details then. It just kind of sets a bad precedent to deny the interview solely on the basis that the person is using a service animal, even though you might be technically entitled to do that. So that's a best practice, is just go ahead with it, deal with it later if you hire the individual. On the next slide, we have an employee who is deaf who asked to bring his service animal to work to help alert him to sounds in his environment. As you heard Alexandra say, there's lots of different things that service animals can do. One is to alert individuals who are deaf of sounds. The employer in this situation wants to know if there's technology available that would work instead. So they want to provide something that would alert to sounds rather than having the service animal in. And the question, is this a good approach? So on the next slide, we see that employers are allowed to explore whether other accommodations might be effective. That's their right, and they can choose among effective options. But something Alexandra said brings up a best practice. Remember that service animals often meet non-work related personal needs, like commuting to and from work, alerting to dangers in the environment outside of work. So keep that in mind. Employers don't have to provide accommodations related to that type of thing on the way to work, but you don't want to interfere with an employee's ability to independently commute to work. So oftentimes there isn't an effective option to a service animal because of this reason. So keep that in mind when you want to explore other options. You need to see if this is an issue for the individual. On the next slide, here we have an employee with diabetes who asked to bring his service animal to work to notify him when his blood sugar drops. The employer decides that the employee should use a glucose monitor instead. Is this a good approach? On the next slide, you'll see that, again, employers get to choose among effective accommodations, but here we have an exception to that. Employers do not get to choose medical treatment. So the difference between this example and the previous one is that the previous one was alerting somebody to sounds in the work environment. Here we have a service animal who's actually involved in medical monitoring and treatment. This is not something an employer gets to say, oh, we're going to provide something else, or why don't you choose some other medical treatment. It's generally a best practice not to even suggest alternative medical treatment. And I want to say for both of these examples, our default position is generally to say that when an employee chooses to use a service or emotional support animal, when you can, try to respect that decision. That's how they want to handle their disability-related issues, whether it's medical or whether it's detecting sounds. An individual has chosen a method to be independent rather than relying on something the employer is going to provide. So when in doubt, try to respect that decision if you can. On the next slide, we have an employer who approves an employee's request to bring a seeing eye dog to work and lets the employee know that a notice will be sent to other employees so they'll know not to interfere with the dog's work, because that can be very important. You don't want people interfering with the work of a service animal by petting it or talking to it. So this sounds like a good approach, but is it a good approach? One of the tricky things for employers is that employers have a duty under the ADA to keep all medical information confidential, including the fact that an employee is receiving an accommodation. And this is tricky because you have a situation where people are going to see the service animal. They're going to know that there's an animal there. They're going to ask questions. They probably will want to interfere with the animal by petting it and talking to it. The best way around this is to talk to the employee about whether the employee wants to voluntarily educate coworkers, because it needs to be voluntary. You can't force an employee to tell other people about an accommodation or a medical condition. In our experience, most employees want to talk to coworkers and educate them about the work of the service animal so that the service animal can work effectively. But if you have a situation where the employee just isn't comfortable doing that, you can do some general education about service animals, but I think probably the best thing to do is to send out a notice that there will be an animal on site and that people are not to interact with it when it's at work. You don't disclose it's a service animal, you don't disclose disability information, but you do let people know that they're not to interfere with the animal when it's on site. On the next slide. Here we have an employee who's in the final stages of getting a trained service animal. As part of the final steps, the employee needs to bring the service animal into the workplace for orientation and training. The employer denies the request because the service animal isn't fully trained. Is this a good approach? You heard from Alexandra that Texas state law may address this issue, and you always want to check your state laws. If for some reason Texas law doesn't apply, the ADA does not address service animals in the workplace, as I mentioned, so it does not address whether employers must consider allowing a service animal in training. Those public access rules don't protect service animals in training, but again, they do not apply in the workplace. So here we've got another gap in anything that you can point to in the law. So a best practice, in my opinion, is to consider allowing the service animal if it's not disruptive. And why not? If this employee is going to successfully be able to use a service animal to address disability-related issues, you don't want to hold that up by not allowing the final stage of training. And on the next slide, I believe I have my final example. And this is a dishwasher in a restaurant who asked to be allowed to have his emotional support animal lay near him while he works. The employer denies the request because animals are not allowed in food prep areas and the food prep area is close by. Is this a good approach? So the general rule under the ADA is that employers do not have to violate other federal laws such as the food codes when providing accommodations under the ADA. But a best practice is to try to determine whether you can comply with both laws. Sometimes the knee-jerk reaction is that, no, we can't have a service animal in here. We deal with food. The food code, to my knowledge, states that service animals may be permitted in areas not used for food preparation. So if this animal could lie safely next to the individual while he works and not be in the food prep area, then you can't deny it on that basis. So do your homework. As with any accommodation, make sure you know the facts, err on the side of caution, and try to go forward with the accommodation when possible. And on my final slide, I have our contact information. The best way to find us is to get on our website, which is askjan.org, and click on contact, and you'll see all the various ways that you can get in touch with us. And you do have my direct email if you have any follow-up questions for me. And with that, I want to turn it back over to Alexandra to introduce Lauren and Buchanan.
Thanks, Linda. So I am very happy to introduce Lauren. Lauren is a graduate of Canine Companions Service Dog Program, and she works with Service Dog Buchanan. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Lauren and Buchanan.
Hello, thank you for that. My name is Lauren Taylor. I am 24 years old and I have muscular dystrophy, so I use a power chair full time. So let me back up really quick and I'll introduce you to my handsome helper over here. Let me tilt the computer screen down a little bit. All right, Buchanan, come here. Come on. Sorry, he was napping. Come here, come. Come. Buchanan, come. Come here. I'm sorry, he doesn't usually do this. Buchanan, stand. Good boy. I know, you're half asleep. Come here, step. Good boy. Here we go. Look up here. There we go. Thank you for making an appearance. So this is Buchanan. I got him in 2016. And he has been a huge help ever since. Thank you. Okay. Off. Wait. So a little bit of background. I got Buchanan right around when I started college. So he's been with me to multiple classes all over campus, and then some of my first jobs were also on campus. So I've been very, very fortunate to have really positive experiences as far as being an employee with a service dog. My disability is very, very visible. So, you know, we've never really been met with questions about my disability or anything like that, like you might have if you have an invisible disability. My very first job, they actually, on my first day, had like a little bed set up for him right next to my desk with a little sign with his name on it, pinned to the wall. So yeah, everyone loves him everywhere we go. So I would say, other than all of the positivity that we've received at every job I have, Buchanan is a very big dog, and he takes up not a ton of space, but he does take up space. And typically I don't use him a ton at work, just because it's usually kind of more of a desk job. I'll drop things occasionally, but the biggest kind of obstacle, I guess, is having room for a bed for him to lay on so that he knows that's his spot, that's where he stays. So just having enough room for, you know, a decent sized bed for him to fit on, and to not be like too crammed up. It usually fits underneath a desk or in a corner somewhere. So I apologize for not having, you know, a ton of things to share as far as, you know, negatives or things I've learned from working with him in the workplace. And I've just been lucky enough to work with people that love dogs and love Buchanan. But I will say, kind of like Alexandra was talking about, is getting to and from work is really important for me and my use of Buchanan. So I just started I just started driving for the very first time in October. So that's the first time I've truly been, fully 100% independent on my own in getting to and from work and to and from wherever I'm going. And having Buchanan has truly been a huge lifesaver, really, and a huge asset to my independence with driving, because I know that if I drop anything on the floor in my car, like my keys or my phone, normally if I didn't have him, I'd be freaking out. I get kind of anxious if I have to try and talk to strangers to grab things for me. So he has really quelled a lot of my anxiety, and it's just exactly like given me my independence, really. And so with that, I just kind of wanted to touch on for a second, about, we were talking about best practices as far as allowing a service dog in the workplace versus maybe some type of other device or technology or something like that. And I will just say this, is that service dogs are kind of the next best thing to having a person helper. Whereas if you use technology, like maybe a grabber to reach things, or just like any other type of technology, as I'm sure some of you have experienced with COVID, it doesn't always work. It can fail, or maybe it didn't get charged, or whatever the case may be. But where technology and devices fail, service dogs do not. So my personal experience is that service dogs are the best practice, at least for me, just because they're not going to fail you. They don't really run out of battery. They're always going to be there for you, just kind of like a human would. So that's kind of my spiel. I definitely want to make sure we have enough time for questions and anything like that. So thank you for letting me share my story with you.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and just go with a couple questions that are already in queue and answer those. Please feel free to text your questions if you have any right now so we can answer them, or the team can answer them for you. One of the first questions we had was, will this deck be accessible to us after the call? So we won't actually send the slideshow out, but we will send a link to the call itself. So you'll be able to have the listening portion or the entire call accessible. And then one of the other questions we did have from, I think this might be geared towards Linda, but I guess anyone can answer. It was from Karen Sims. And it was, before considering allergies as an unhardship regarding allergies, does the employee with the allergy have to prove the allergies to the animal? Does that make sense, Linda?
That does make sense. That's a really good question. The technical answer is that under the Americans with Disabilities Act, anytime an individual says they need an accommodation, an employer has the right to get medical documentation to prove there's a disability covered by the ADA and to prove that the accommodation is needed. That is not required. Employers do not have to get that. A simpler approach would be to, yes, the individual is allergic, and let's get some details on how the allergy manifests itself. Is it the dander? Is it, what is going on that's creating the allergy? Can they be in the building with the animal if they're at separate ends? Getting the details about what exactly is the issue and what are our options for resolving it. So technically, yes, an employer can ask for documentation, but it's never required. So you can just forego that if you choose to.
Great, thank you. And of course, Lauren, a lot of thank yous and excitement with you sharing Buchanan, so thank you. I do see no other questions though in chat. Does anyone have any other questions? Well, Alexandra and Linda, it's because you had such a thorough presentation that they have no other questions at this time. We can leave it up, or Melissa, I'll send it back to you.
Someone did actually put a question in there, just so you know.
Oh yeah, I do see one right here. It says, I work in an office that serves people with disabilities of all types. How does it work when someone needs to bring a service dog, but there are others in the building with respiratory or allergies, disabilities that may be affected by animals?
So I can hit that again. It again, a best practice in that situation would be to see if you can accommodate everybody, um, and allow the service animal, but accommodate the individuals with allergies at the same time. Some of the guidelines we recommend exploring, if you've got a big enough building and you can physically separate people, do enough cleaning that the dander is picked up every night. Some animals can use dander shampoo that helps the situation. That's not always an option. Um, Sometimes people are very happy to telework, and one of the individuals may want to telework as an accommodation to avoid the situation. Sometimes service animals can stay in an office when individuals who are allergic have to meet with the person who uses the service animal. That's not always an option, depends on what the service animal does, and that's something that can be explored with the individual. So there's a lot of different things to explore. The number one thing to do is explore options. Talk with everybody and see if you can come up with solutions so that everybody can work together and be accommodated effectively. And we can help with that on a case-by-case basis. We do have that guidance on our website, but we're also happy to talk with you individually if you have a specific situation.
Great, thank you, Linda. Again, we're just waiting for any other questions to come through.
I had a question for Lauren, if I can ask.
Yes, please do.
So how do you handle breaks for your dog? Did you make that as a request from from your employer as an accommodation to be able to take breaks to go out? Was there a place handy? We get a lot of questions related to dealing with what needs the service animal might have during the day. So I just thought I'd pick your brain to see what you do with that.
Yeah, so I am still currently a student up until 2 weeks from now. So I have only so far worked part-time. And so I haven't been, necessarily working for a super long time. So usually Buchanan is, I make sure to let him go potty before we go into the office. And then the first thing we do when we leave the office. And it hasn't really ever been an issue. Of course, he is a dog, he is a living thing, so there have been times where, he might be having tummy issues. I know Buchanan in particular has a pretty sensitive stomach, so we have had to deal with some like throw up issues from time to time too in the office, which for me is a little awkward just because like I can't clean it up. And so luckily asking, a fellow employee to help with some of those things has not necessarily been an issue. But it is one of those things that just like makes me a little nervous because that's not something that's necessarily on anyone's like duties as an employee somewhere. But typically, it's usually things that Buchanan can alert me to, and we can get outside pretty quickly. Um, but yeah, as far as asking for like an accommodation to take him outside, I've never had to do that. Um, everyone I've worked with has always just been very relaxed and flexible with anything I've needed as far as taking care of Buchanan, especially if I've had to stay home with him before if he's sick or had a procedure or anything like that.
Great. That's so good to hear. We tend to get questions when there are issues. So it's good to hear that a lot of times these things just work themselves out. Thanks a lot for answering that question.
Yeah, of course. And it definitely helps that being a Canine Companions dog, he's very well trained. So just like Alexandra said, a lot of the time we get like, wow, he's so incredibly behaved, or I never knew he was even there. So of course that helps tremendously with kind of getting that leniency at, workplaces and things like that.
Probably doesn't hurt that he's so adorable either.
Yes, definitely.
So Lauren, oh, I'm sorry. So I was just going to ask, while he's kind of in work, right? I mean, he's on duty. Do you allow your coworkers to acknowledge him, pet him? Do you have to have a specific command to allow that?
It depends on the situation. Typically, I don't let people interact with him because he absolutely loves people. And if I, let people interact with him, then he gets distracted and doesn't, it kind of blurs that line of working and not working. However, because he does love people so much, he kind of will not settle down if we're in kind of a really small space with another person until he gets to greet them. And once he greets them, then he's fine. He lays on his bed. He's knocked out for the rest of the time. So like the job I'm at right now, I am typically in a very, very small office, and it's shared with one other person. And we swap desks because I don't have my own desk to sit at. It's kind of a whole thing. But so Buchanan's bed is next to one of the desks, and instead of moving it from desk to desk, it just stays there. And he's, used to that person. We've been there for a while, so he'll just walk straight from the front door straight to his bed and lay down. But when I first started there, I definitely did have to kind of let him say hello, kind of learn the people we were working in close quarters with, just to kind of get that excitement of a new person out. And then he's fine. So yes and no, to answer your question. It definitely depends on the situation. I don't give him a command for it, as far as, releasing him to be a normal dog or anything like that. It's usually very kind of brief introduction, just hello, how are you, couple pats on the head, and then he'll lay down. So
Good, wonderful. Thank you for that.
mm-hmm.
Anyone else have any other questions? Well, Michael, while people may be formulating their very last question, maybe I'll just send it to you to make any closing remarks. And again, just a reminder that the link to the presentation will be sent out probably within the week as soon as we get it confirmed. So you'll be able to have this information with you handy.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I think we had some really great questions today. Really good presentation. Just delighted and honored to partner with this organization. I think you brought up some really good topics, some really good areas that those of you that are attending right now, if you serve in a human resources role, or if you serve in a role that could possibly affect the way we improve our policies in the workplace, please reach out and utilize these resources. They're there for you. Dallas is growing quickly. We have a lot of migration coming from California. We have migration coming from Oklahoma and New York. So Dallas is growing rapidly, and so are the human resources policies. And I challenge each and every one of you to kind of go back to your organizations and take a look at the policy and see if that's something that falls under their reasonable accommodations, or if they fall under the HR policy that you currently have. And if not, is it possible to amend it? Maybe take a look at it. This is a growing trend, and it's really a positive effect on those with disabilities that may require a service animal. So please, again, I challenge you to reach out to these resources, utilize them, and again, there's a lot of great opportunities right now that we can actually reach out and volunteer and. So please, again, thank you so much, ladies, for your presentation. Learned so much. I took out a whole lot of notes, and I'm definitely going back to my organization to see how I can make a better impact in this area, and reaching out to my resources here in Greater Dallas to see how we can partner with them as a large organization. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. There actually was one last little note come in the chat, and so I want to see if we have like 5 minutes, Alexandra, to potentially share maybe briefly about being a puppy raiser. Is that something you can squeeze in there?
Definitely, yeah.
Okay.
So as I mentioned, Canine Companions does place service dogs for people with disabilities. And one of the really cool things about our organization is that we provide those dogs at no cost to the recipient. So we really help break down those barriers for people with disabilities to access the service dogs they need, because they don't have to pay for them from us. We can only do that with help, of course. So we have really amazing volunteers and, donors and corporate sponsors who help us do it. And a huge part of that is our puppy raisers. So we have a breeding program out in California. And when the dogs are about 8 weeks old, they actually get shipped all over the country, and they live with a volunteer puppy raiser until they're about 1.5 years. And that puppy raiser helps them learn some basic obedience skills and socializes the dog and lets the dog get experience in lots of different settings and around different types of people, so that when they come to us on our campus for their service dog training, they're really ready to go. And so those puppy raisers do so much for us, and they have the dog for about 1.5 years, and then they return it to us so that it can be placed with someone with a disability. So what a happy, exciting moment when they get the call that their dog has been matched with someone like Lauren. I can only imagine Buchanan's puppy raisers and how just thrilled they were when they found out that he was going to get to do this job that he was destined to do with a pretty cool person. But we're always needing more puppy raisers. So if you would like to reach out to us, my email was provided earlier, but I'll say it again. It's awalch@canine.org. And I'm happy to put you in touch directly with our puppy program manager if you think that's something that would be of interest to you.
Thank you so much. And there is a question in regards to the wait list. I'm assuming the question is regarding wait list for dogs themselves as opposed to being.
Yeah, so there is a wait list. It takes us some time. We've got to get the dogs ready. By the time they're matched, they know over 40 commands. And so that is a huge thing also for our clients. It breaks down those barriers. Not everybody has the skills to train a dog on their own. And so we have professional trainers who do it for them. And by the time the dog is matched, they're really ready to go to work, and we teach the individual how to maintain those skills. So it takes time. We have waits that vary depending on exactly what the individual needs. So we do place dogs who work with adults who have physical disabilities, veterans who have PTSD. We have dogs that work with children that have a whole variety of disabilities, whether physical or developmental. And so all of those dogs can do different things, and their training may take different amounts of time. So in general, we say that we don't want anyone to wait longer than 24 months to be matched with their dog. Sometimes it's shorter, but we also find that it varies because we don't make matches based on the order someone is on the wait list. We make matches for when we have the right dog for them. So part of our application process is not just to find out what skills they need the dog to do, but what their lifestyle looks like. So if we know that the dog is going to go be at an office all day, we need to find a dog that can do the skills the individual needs and also be comfortable and happy laying quietly at someone's feet while they work at their computer. Or if there's someone who's going to be out hiking every weekend, we're not going to put a dog there that hates hiking, because that's not going to be helpful for the individual. So the wait varies just depending on exactly what the person needs, but our goal is always to serve people in under 24 months.
Great, thank you so much. Well, again, to reiterate everything that's been said and Michael's ending, we do thank everyone for joining the call today. And if there are no other questions, everyone have a great, wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.